that since you can't identify, therefore you don't even want to make an effort to give signatures to something which is a collective product. So my caution is that yes, there is much to learn from Adivasis, but to get to that point, we need to be very cautious that we don't get into a fetish of using this phrase of learning from Adivasis, but actually doing quite the opposite, which is take away from them the knowledge that they have and actually learn nothing from them. Because that knowledge is actually generated from a huge lot of other things which constitutes Adivasi life. The second preliminary point I want to make is that the possibility, anybody who wants to entertain this possibility of learning from Adivasis is actually making a very, very radical and a revolutionary statement. Because what you're actually trying to say is that to address the modern crises, we are looking for sources of enlightenment which are other than the European source of enlightenment, which has so far conditioned the entire thinking rubric of how we think of alternatives. Because Adivasi enlightenment has nothing to do, even in the remote past, or even in, if you believe in life before death, even in past lives, to do anything with what your European enlightenment has to say. So what is the rubric of this new source of enlightenment, which we will get in the course of learning from Adivasi, which may be useful to us in addressing some of the questions that we face today in the modern society. My thesis began with this proposition that I want to learn the language of Adivasis. And in the course of that pursuit, I realized that this is not the same as representing the Adivasis. And this is a very important distinction to maintain. That when I am saying I am going to report to you what I learned from Adivasis, I do not therefore pretend to say that this is what Adivasis themselves have to say about their own work. It may be completely the opposite of what Adivasis want to say. Right? This is my learning from Adivasis. And it is important to make this distinction because I am not speaking for anyone. I am speaking for myself. I am speaking from what I learned from the Adivasis. They might have wanted to teach me something completely different. But I am very sure, and I want to underline this fact, that this is what I as an individual learned from Adivasis, and I am putting that before you. And with the caution that this is not an attempt to represent what Adivasis might want to say about their own life. In fact, most of the Adivasis who are now part of the modern world would not want to subscribe to what I say is important to learn from the Adivasis. And this is very, very important to state right at the beginning. A third preliminary point is that so far, in the subaltern school, especially in the works of Ranjit Guha, Elementary Structures of Present Insurgency, a point that has not really been discussed fully is that Ranjit Guha is actually arguing that Adivasis cannot have revolutionary potential. He has listed 8 elements of insurgency, and each of these elements is saying that Adivasis, because they lack the possibility of being delinked or being alienated from their roots, they do not have revolutionary potential. And this is, he states in many different ways, by pointing out, for example, he has one attribute of territoriality. And he says Adivasis are very, very territorially bound. Right? They're very, very family bound, they're very, very lineage bound. And until they are able to sever their links and become a class for itself, as most Marxists think, not Marx, they have no revolutionary potential. This is the crux of the argument of that book by Ranjit Guha. And I want to draw your attention to the fact that in recent past, that has been proved wrong. Adivasi activism has in fact challenged the practices of a certain variety of left extreme activism in India and elsewhere in the world. To give you a very concrete example, in Koilkaro, which is an Adivasi struggle against the dam, Maoists approached the Koilkaro organizations to align with them, and they resisted. And the argument was very simple, that we cannot take your methodologies, because we want our daughters, our grandchildren, our women, our elderly people to be part of the activist movement. If we follow your path, they will not be part of the activist movement and we can't sustain it. Mendalekha is another example. That's a place that I visited also. Again, the extreme left-wing forces approached them and they said, sorry, we are not interested in collaborating with you. For the same reason that if we have to be activists, we have to be activists whole and soul. Which means our children, our women, our elders are actually as much part of the activist movement as our young people are. We cannot simulate things with them. There is an interesting book written by Sanjay Basumalik on the Jharkhand movement, in which he has also reiterated this point many times, that the Adivasis are not interested in collaborating with forces that are wanting to destroy the basic sense of belonging. So my proposition is that what can we learn from Adivasi activism that might help us to understand the issues that we're dealing with and the kind of answers that we may look forward to. And the answer that I want to give is that they teach us a sense of belonging. To re-emphasize this point, I want to take you to South Africa, the Truth, Peace and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. There is a very philosophical movement which says, I think therefore I am, or I am therefore I think. The contrary and the oppositional position to this philosophical mode of being human is Ubuntu. I think you should read this book, and he says this very clearly. So it is the sense of belonging. And their argument would be, what kind of a revolutionary are you if you belong nowhere? What do we learn from Adivasi activism in order to address the problems that we are going to face? And this is my third point. Many years ago, when I was working with Smita Kothari, who is no longer with us now, we had gone to the Northeast to undertake some mobilizations against a program that the World Bank was wanting to bring to the Northeast. The World Bank had placed a document, and the activists in that area had collected together to contemplate on the document. There was a meeting, and they said, we would like to give you a critique of the document. The World Bank is now very open to critiques, so they said, very well, we will take your critique. So they gave the critique. And in a month's time, World Bank produced another document, double the size of what they did the first time, incorporating all the critiques that were given to them. They were placed before the activists again. And now the activists had to produce another document. And the activists could not do it. And the answer was very simple, that we are too busy firefighting and we have no resources to compete with the World Bank. A lot of arguments happened, and it was told to these activists that you have a huge network of people. You have people working in every village, with every family. Why do you want to utilize that network to collect the necessary documents that you need to collect the necessary facts and figures that you need to collect, and place a document not which is an answer to the World Bank, but place a document which is your document. And you say, we want a discussion on this document, and not the document which is a critique of the World Bank. That effort could not take place. And I think this is very important to keep in mind, that what are the things that we need to keep in mind? What are the questions that we need to keep in mind? In case we were to produce a document, which is not an answer to any mainstream document, but which is a document springing from your own authentic belonging experiences of the world, which represents your blueprint of the world, which represents your idea of what you want to be, and which represents how you want to do it. What can we learn from Adivasis regarding this methodology? And how are we going to produce this document? And what are the questions that you need to keep in mind? I'm not addressing questions which are of policy importance at the moment today, which are questions of what is shifting cultivation, what is indigenous knowledge about medicine, what is their view of uncultivated plants and food. All those are very important issues. And all that I want to say about those issues is that we are really concerned not with documenting and listing those issues. We are really concerned with how do you reproduce uncultivated food in a world today where the forest is not available to you. What what you will do, this is a meeting that happened last month in which uncultivated foods were listed, and my question now to those forums is, good, you've listed all the uncultivated food, but the question is not of listing, the question is how you're going to ensure the reproduction of uncultivated food, because these are not cultivated foods. You can't plant them, and it requires a completely different approach, and a completely different methodology to understand how these foods can be reproduced. Now, that is a large question, and I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to raise a few issues on what can be learned. What does this learning mean? This learning is very different from the learning that we are used to understand today. And I think this is the first thing I want to say about what I learned about learning in the course of learning from Adivasis, the language, which is really part of the PhD research. What I learned was that learning actually is about finding out what really is learnable. And that is a very difficult question. There are so many things we experience, there are so many things we read, there are so many things which are very, very enticing to us, there are so many things that appeal to us, there are so many things that we want to get charged by, but is everything there learnable? I further learned from Adivasis that what is learnable is actually truth-telling. When I went to Abujamar, the first thing I was told was that if you leave 200 coins of gold on the road, and if you come back after 6 months, nobody would have touched it. That was the society in which I was going to stay for a substantial number of years, beginning 1982. This is a good example of truth-telling. I also learned from them that in order to do truth-telling, there is a certain relationship between two people who are going to exchange, and that exchange is going to become the basis of knowledge. It is not possible to do truth-telling between two unequals. A very important condition of learning is that the one who teaches and the one who learns, or co-learners, must be at par. They must be equal in some sense of the word. For to give and to receive, it requires at least this minimal condition of equality. Otherwise, what is given and what is taken is entirely part of the political structure, as we know from interviews, as we know from classroom dynamics in a variety of schools and colleges across the world, as much as in India. What has happened to this relationship between the Adivasis and the outside world over 200 years? Are we in a position where we can say that there is a certain amount of parity, there is a certain amount of equality between the Adivasis from whom we wish to learn, and most of the Adivasis don't even know that people who go and learn from them actually come to learn from them. They just tell you what you ask them. You want to know how many plants to eat? Very, very innocently, they'll give you the whole list. And when you come to forums, which are in the city, you say, I am a very great learner from Adivasis, and this is what I have learned. Your Adivasi friend doesn't even know that you have gone to learn from them what you're going to put forward in the list and then make it available to the larger world. So this is between us. We really don't know what the Adivasis actually think about what we do and what we learn. I mean, we have some glimpse of it from across the world. For example, the Maoris are very now clear that nobody will go research, nobody will do research of them unless a Maori person is there to see what they do. Nobody will ever publish a word about the Maoris unless the Maoris have seen the document themselves. I don't think this is the case in India at all. To get to that stage, I think we have a long way to go. So within us, then how do we wish to facilitate our learning from Adivasis, from their life experience? I propose that we invert the linear scale of development that we used to think. In this linear scale of development, the Adivasis come at the bottom because they're into magic, they're into witchcraft, they're into animism, and they have to reach science and reason and rationality, and that's on top of the hierarchy. The way we will invert this linearity is by saying that the crisis of modern society is really a crisis of measure. We do not know the benchmarks of how to judge things. For instance, CSC once upon a time said, I think if you have 0.9% of urea in your food, it's fine. Because that's the level that the body can tolerate. And when asked the question, why not 0% urea, that's an impossibility because that will require a huge number of changes in industry for you to have 0% food in urea. I think that's the case for health, that's the case for development. I think GDP is no indicator of development at all. It may be an indicator of volumes, but it is no indicator of how actually human beings grow and progress. So we want to invert by saying that our concern is not with bottoms up or bottoms down. Our concern is really identifying questions that are on the frontier, as opposed to the mainstream. In the mainstream, everything is standardized. In the frontier, there are questions that need answers. And there are no methodologies available to us to answer those questions. For instance, how do Adivasis know medicinal plants without knowledge of physics, chemistry, and biology? This is a frontier question. Another frontier question is that Adivasis have zero carbon footprint. And they are one society that has no debt. Right? We want to put them right on top. And we want to put America right at the bottom. Because they are most indebted in carbon and in finance. They're in the red right across, and they're supposed to be the most developed world. We want to invert them, and we're not saying therefore that we want to become Adivasi or we want to get back to the world of the forest. That will be a fetish of learning from Adivasi. Certainly we can't go back and live in the forest. But yes, the question still remains, then what can we learn from the Adivasis? What can we learn in order that our indicators of development move towards zero carbon footprint and towards a no-debt society? I have no answers to this, but this is an important question, and it is a question of measure. And by measure, I mean a benchmark. I think that is a benchmark towards which we all need to progress if we want to go to a different society with a different kind of an enlightenment than the one given to us by Europe. How can we all aspire in individual lives and collective lives to reduce our footprint from whatever it is to zero, and to reduce our debts, whatever kinds, to zero? And how can we therefore lead a life which is healthy? Having said these, I would want to draw attention to one other very important fact about possibilities of learning from Adivasis. Levi-Strauss, is one of his essays, just by the way, mentions that as the knowledge, as anthropology as a discipline grows, the people vanish. And this is a very, very important statement to make, about which Levi-Strauss makes no reflection, makes no contemplation. As I study something, the object of my study does not survive and become enriched, it actually gets destroyed. So who are we going to learn from? Who are the people left of the Adivasis whom we will learn from? And this is, I think, a very, very important question. And when we go to learn from Adivasis, what are we going to learn from? And who are these Adivasis from whom we want to learn? And I think this is a question which was asked when PESA 1996 was passed, in which tradition was given a huge priority, and in FRA 2006, where again tradition is given huge priority. And some of us asked this question, what is the tradition that you're referring to? When most of the people who are forest dwellers are now part of a city where the culture of their work and the language of their work has nothing to do with the language of the custom, language of the myths, language of the folklore. There is no connection between working on a computer and singing songs about Malamburu or Tarurmute or any such mythology that you have. I think that question is even more important today if we want to take this question very, very seriously. So I want to briefly give you a history of this question and the history of a relationship with Adivasis, so that we can really get down to brass tacks of what possibilities are there to learn from them. Very briefly, the question history is like this. When in colonial times the Adivasis were sort of put into special zones of excluded and partially excluded areas, which were like reservations, right? The question was posed should the Adivasis be left in isolation, should they be integrated, or should they be assimilated? These were actually not choices. We think that they were choices, there were no choices at all. Because the decision had already been taken. That these people are mentally weak, these people have no sense of reason, they are very well cultured, which is very relevant to us, right? And therefore, we can't deal with them in a brutish way, right? And that is how enlightened we are as governments. This is what Warren Hastings brought to us as cultural policy. That we will govern with knowledge. We will need to know the people whom we govern in order to govern them. So we would like to know who these Adivasis are. Therefore, our rules and regulations will be very nice. We won't harm them, we won't kill them, we won't brutishly exploit the forest resources. We will minimize the damage of primitive accumulation, which is forceful taking away means of livelihood. Therefore, they are there. The decision was taken that from there they have to be mainstream. And these three were not options. These three were actually three different stages over which they would be incorporated. So first step was isolation, which the laws made. So when you say you are excluded in partially excluded area, you are isolated from the rest of the world. And when you became independent, the 5th and 6th schedule did the same. So you first isolate them from the rest of the world, right? Then you start to slowly assimilate them. And how did they do it? And Abujamar gave me a very good strategy. What they did was that on the foothills of Abujamar, they set up Hindus who were rice cultivators. Because no Englishman ever knew the language of the Koitors, right? They did not have the patience to persuade them. So the strategy was, if a Hindu community, which is rice cultivating community, is settled next to a shifting cultivation community, over a period of time they will learn from each other and they will learn the culture of rice cultivation and move slowly to the city. And that worked wonderfully. It worked wonderfully. So first you isolate them, then you gradually assimilate them, and finally you make them part of the mainstream, which is integration. Right? Now in this relationship, a certain body of knowledge was generated about Adivasis. Now what was this relationship? I want to say that the 5th and 6th schedule and its predecessor, which is excluded and partially excluded areas, are actually counter-insurgency measures. These are measures not designed to give space for Adivasi agency and initiatives. These are measures to counter the insurgency of Adivasis, who are actually the first in this country to protest against the British exploitation of the forest. Even before the much before any other person did it, it was the Adivasis who stood up against the British first. And to suppress the insurgency, these laws were made. So therefore, these are counter-insurgency laws. And we need to recognize them as counter-insurgency laws. And these three options that were given to us, isolation, assimilation, integration, these are counter-insurgency options. These are not options for agency and establishment, and they close the possibility of any kind of learning from Adivasis. After independence, what happened? After independence, the process is very well known to us. All those who were forest dwellers and were Adivasis in that sense of the word have slowly been moved out, right? And they occupy different levels in the modern economy, different levels of strata in modern economy. Some are ministers, some are in white-collar jobs, some are industrialists, some are school teachers, some are patwaris, right? Some are working as daily wage forest workers. But progressively, the effort is to draw them all into the wage economy in this progressive fashion. And PESA and FRA are instruments of doing that. These are more sophisticated means of primitive accumulation than of empowerment. And by primitive accumulation, I really mean what Marx meant, which is willful and forceful taking away the means of subsistence of people. How PESA and FRA do it? They minimize the damage, in the sense that you are given only land enough for one generation, and not more than that. After one generation, forest dwellers, Adivasis will have to migrate, because there won't be enough land for subsequent generations to survive on. I think that's the scenario that we have. So, from isolation, the tribal discourse is now on identity and tribal rights. So this is a change of terms of reference. And when we mean identity, we are really talking about customs, we are really talking about festivals, we are talking about dance, we are talking about music. And when we talk about tribal rights, we are talking about right to livelihood, right to wage, right to health, right to education. And again, the language of these two don't talk to each other. And the proof of that is that nowhere is Adivasi language the basis of instruction. And the second proof of that is, a lot of us are convinced that the only way to recognize tribal language is with the recognition of the state. Only if the state gives recognition to tribal languages will they be recognized. And my personal view of the matter is, that's the first and the last and the best way to destroy language, by giving it recognition by the state. Because you will standardize it, you will legalize it, you will make meanings more precise and more specific. Whereas in a tribal language, and I had the fortune of learning one, there is flexibility. There are multiple metaphors in the same word. There is an amazing amount of creativity in the use of the same word in different contexts. That volatile character of a language will be totally lost. It won't be a tribal language at all. It will be transformed in the nature of grammatized Sanskrit or Hindi or English. I don't think that is tribal language, and that's my second proof of the fact that these things actually don't work together. Having put this, I want to also highlight a very, very nice emerging scenario. In recent times, there has been an amazing amount of debate on whether tribals can be represented by non-tribals or not. There's a divide. I think PESA was instrumental in deepening this divide totally. And likewise for other communities. A lot of Dalits feel that non-Dalits cannot write about it because they have no clue of the suffering. I want to draw attention to the fact that many non-tribals have actually given up a huge amount of their own lives to actually give a lifetime to learning from tribal way of life and living like them. As much as there are many tribals who have given up on their own fellow beings and have become part of the modern mainstream life. I think this is a very important fact we need to remember, and we need to also understand that the hope of learning from tribals' life is in recognizing that tribals and non-tribals are companions in one way, either for promoting one agenda of development or to promote another agenda of development. And the agendas of development that we're referring to have been very well documented in a very amazing document written by American Indians called Paradigm Wars. We're actually engaged in a paradigm war. And this paradigm war is not the exclusive domain of any one community, right? I would say there is a heterogeneity of elements, there is a diversity of people who are coming together to fight these paradigm wars, right? And we are interested in consolidating the experiences of all kinds of people in making these paradigm wars. The Adivasis are therefore, in my view, not tribals. And by tribals I mean those who have given up on a particular kind of work ethic which is associated with the forest. In the tribal's worldview, the forest has no place. The tribal worldview has been deforested. And I think it is a deforestation of the mind that we're going to fight. The Adivasi is one whose worldview is very, very fundamentally forested. If you were to understand a worldview like a small little screen, and if you were to put all the objects that are important for you to live a daily life, you will see that in the modern worldview, the forest has only place as much as you can give it in your personal gardens, or in your rooms, or in a park. The rest of the world is a very beautiful painting made by a Mexican painter that actually shows this. It has a face, and the face there is a little bubble, and in that bubble is everything that is in the minds of the man. And there is only one plant in that bubble. Everything else is including telephones, videos, films, consumer goods, industries, aeroplanes, everything that you have of modern world. All material objects from there. I think this is the fight. How can we fight the deforested mind is the question. And I want to suggest two very important works who give us an idea of how to do this. One is Desmond Tutu, which I have told you. The second is Paradigm Wars, which is a text which is now available on the net also. It's written by Native American Indians, and it tells you all about the the wars that are being waged against multilateral World Trade Organization, etc. And the other book that I want to recommend is a book called Radical Hope. I forget the name of the author, but it's written by an American anthropologist. And this book is actually telling us a narrative of how the Native American Indians were thinking when they were being pushed into reservations. We only know how they were pushed into reservations. This is one book which actually tells you what went on within their own society, in their own mind, when they were confronting the possibility of being thrown into reservations. And this is based on a narrative or a conversation between a Native American Indian chief and a young boy at that particular point in time. And this anthropologist has taken the narrative and he's rendered it for us to understand what is happening. And the most important point that they're making is how to respond to a situation when you see the annihilation of a civilization happening in front of your own eyes. What kind of courage do you need in order to confront that situation? And what would you like to do in such a situation? And I think that is a very important question. And from there, we need to learn from Adivasis a lot. In conclusion, I want to say that what is being debated really is the notion of a human being. What is it to be human is now a very big question. In the 1960s, when we were on the path of development, we thought that development would be equal to modernity, which means the more we work in rational ways, the more we become part of the modern economy, the more our mindscapes will increase, the more open we will become, the more human we will become. But experience has shown that that is not the case. We are becoming less and less modern and more developed. Right? It is this divide, it is this dissociation that is the crisis of the times. The European enlightened idea of a human being, or what it means to be human, has been thoroughly undermined. And this is not my words. There is a huge amount of debate within Europe also, which is really concerned about what is it to mean a human being. And what we are proposing is, what we need to learn from Adivasis is, if we want to keep them right there, as exemplary people from whom we want to learn, is what is the notion of the human being that we now need to position in order for us to really search for concrete alternatives. Thank you.
I think next on the agenda.